our listeners are familiar with the terminology human trafficking, and if you aren't, we're going to explore it further. Our guest later in the hour is Randy Taggart with Impact Virginia. Before we get into the topic, I want to give our listeners the number to the National Human Trafficking Hotline. That number is 1-888-373-7888. Again, the number is 1-888-373-7888, and that is the National Human Trafficking Hotline number. As well, I want to provide the text line for Be Free. That text is 233733. I also want to provide the call-in number for WRWK FM, which is 804-464-1809. WRWK 93.9 FM is an all-volunteer radio station. It is a community radio station focusing on community-inspired personal and political conversations. And we can always use your help here at WRWK. If you'd like to make a donation, please visit our website, or you can also donate through the Facebook page, The Work FM.
What was the 233733 text line?
That is Be Free, which is for, thank you. So, excuse me, according to Wikipedia, human trafficking is the trade of humans for the purpose of forced labor, sexual slavery, or commercial sexual exploitation for the trafficking or trafficker or others. Human trafficking can occur within a country or transnationally. Human trafficking is the illegal trade of human beings for the purposes of reproductive slavery, commercial sexual exploitation, forced labor, and is a modern-day form of slavery. Slavery is a system under which people are treated as property and are forced to work. These two terms have multiple things in common. Slavery is human trafficking. So I want to take something from CNN during my research about slavery versus human trafficking. Are they different? Slavery occurs, this is from CNN, when one person completely controls another person using violence or the threat of violence to maintain that control, exploits them economically, pays them nothing, and they cannot walk away. Human trafficking is defined in the UN Trafficking Protocol as the recruitment, transport, transfer, harboring, or receipt of a person by such means as threat or use of force or other forms of coercion, of abduction, or fraud or deception for the purpose of exploitation. So now that we know what it's all about, let's talk about it a little bit. This is from an article from the Council on Foreign Relations, which you can read at foreignaffairs.com. It was written by Rachel Vogelstein in January of 2018, and it's talking about the forms of human trafficking. So the different forms that Rachel has discussed is bonded labor, domestic servitude, sexual exploitation, and forced marriage. A lot of times we don't think about forced marriage being a form of human trafficking, but it really in fact is. Bonded labor is among the leading forms of slavery across South Asia. It traps generations of families in manual labor in dangerous conditions without the means to pay for freedom. The cycle often begins with a loan request made to a landlord or business owner for expenses incurred burying a family member, treating an illness, procuring employment, or staging a wedding. Today, in India alone, tens of thousands of women are bonded into decades of manual labor in brick kilns or rice mills. and this is a form of bonded labor. There is also domestic servitude, which forces someone to carry out daily chores in a private household. It's another form of slavery that overwhelmingly targets women and adolescent girls. Victims of domestic servitude can be trafficked across continents and lack the workplace protections to prevent mistreatment, exploitation, and sexual violence. Sex trafficking and sexual exploitation can also manifest as a form of debt bondage, with traffickers claiming that individuals must work in the commercial sex industry to pay for their transportation, recruitment, or basic needs. This crime frequently accompanies conflict and instability, and here is an example. ISIS gained control of swaths of territory across Iraq and Syria. Yazidi women and girls as young as 8 were forced into sexual slavery, sold in markets, or gifted by commanders to fighters as brides. According to the Kurdistan Regional Government, Islamic State extremists enslaved a total of 6,417 Yazidis, and an estimated 3,000 remained captive as of September 2017. Forced marriage. This is another form of human trafficking, is another way in which children, particularly girls, are often enslaved. Girls as young as 9 can be forced into arranged unions, often the result of financial transactions or deeply ingrained cultural practices. Girls account for 88% of the world's victims of forced marriage, with children under the age of 15 making up 44% of such marriages. So absolutely horrible, horrible statistics and facts to help understand human trafficking and the different forms of human trafficking. I think sometimes we just think of human trafficking as, someone is kidnapped or taken against their will and sold to someone, and we don't really think about these other forms being considered trafficking, when in fact they are. According to the International Labor Organization, and forced labor alone, which is one component of human trafficking, generates an estimated $150 billion in profits per year as of 2014. In 2012, they estimated that 21 million victims are trapped in modern-day slavery. Of these 14.2 million, 68% were exploited for labor, 4.5 million, 22% were sexually exploited, and 2.2 million, 10%, were exploited in state-imposed forced labor. So human trafficking is thought to be one of the fastest growing activities of transnational criminal organizations. It's condemned as a violation of human rights by international conventions. In addition, human trafficking is subject to a directive in the European Union, according to a report by the U.S. State Department. Belarus, Iran, Russia, and Turkmenistan remain among the worst countries when it comes to providing protection against human trafficking and forced labor. I want to give you some Virginia statistics about human trafficking, and this is according to the National Human Trafficking Hotline. Altogether, total calls, 4,248. Total cases, 1,025. 502 calls, 156 human trafficking cases were reported in 2017. Of those 156, 109 were sex trafficking, another 6 were sex and labor trafficking, and of those stats, there were 92 adults and 47 minors. Also want to mention a project called the Polaris Project. The website for Polaris is polarisproject.org. POLARIS project.org. This project was founded in 2002. Polaris is named for the North Star, which people held in slavery in the United States used as a guide to navigate their way toward freedom. Polarisproject.org.
Okay, sorry.
Today we are filling in the roadmap for that journey and lighting the path ahead, and that comes directly from the site. Polaris serves victims and survivors through the 24/7 National Human Trafficking Hotline. And let me give you that number again. It is 1-888-373-7888. They coordinate with referral partners nationwide as a national access point for trauma-informed support. They are building one of the largest public data sets on human trafficking in the United States and digging deeper to learn how the business of human trafficking really works in real time. They are turning knowledge into action, designing targeted strategies that change entire systems tailored to specific types of trafficking and specific industries. They enlist law enforcement and other public and private sector partners, moving those strategies into the real world to support survivors and prevent and disrupt human trafficking at scale. I want to provide you now with the risks for human trafficking that, again, came from the polarisproject.org site. Those are recent migration or relocation, substance abuse, runaway, homeless youth, mental health concern, and involvement in the child welfare system. There are three types of trafficking that are mentioned on the site. Sex trafficking, which includes escort services, residential, and outdoor solicitation. The next type is sex and labor trafficking, illicit massage businesses, bar, strip club, cantina, and illicit activities. And then there is labor trafficking, which is domestic work, agriculture, and peddling and begging. So these are the people that are typically affected by trafficking. Who are the survivors of trafficking? Every year, more survivors are reaching out to the National Human Trafficking Hotline, and more individuals are seeking help for victims they know. The data is not based on a systematic survey, but are analyzed from the information received about 10,615 survivors from January 1st, 2017 to December 31st, 2017. As people disclosed more detailed information about their own trafficking experiences or about potential victims for whom they were seeking support, hotline staff noted key elements. Of those 10,615 calls they received in 1 year, there were 6,204 adults, 2,762 minors, and unknown 1,575. The breakdown in gender for those 10,615 are 8,561 female, big shock, male 1,454, and gender minorities 59, unknown 541. And to break that out even further, Latino was 1,230, Asian 979, white 699, African American or black 592, and multi-ethnic, multiracial 136. Typically, the methods of force, fraud, and coercion include isolation, emotional abuse, economic abuse, threats of any kind, and physical abuse. The breakdown in those numbers from those 10,615 calls in 1 year are 2,574 for isolation, including confinement, 2,370 for emotional abuse, 2,049 for economic abuse, threats of any kind, 1,880, and physical abuse, 1,652, and that is non-sexual abuse. Another website I visited in my research, which we're soon going to have our caller, Randy Taggart, joining us, but there's another site you can look at to find out more about sex trafficking, and that is called Shared Hope International. You can visit that website at sharedhope.org. It is dedicated to bringing an end to sex trafficking through a three-prong approach, which is prevent, restore, and bring justice. So our caller, we're waiting on Randy Taggart with Impact to call in. She has provided me information that let me know her areas of focus at Impact and for research for tonight's show, which she works on the underlying causes of sex trafficking, the importance of wraparound, long-term trauma-focused services after trafficking, and the essential component of respecting the victim survivors as autonomous. Impact Virginia mission is to protect youth by advocating for prevention, education as a way to end the human trafficking of youth in communities across Virginia. Let's welcome Randy Taggart, and thank you, Randy, for joining us this evening to discuss this very important topic. How you doing, Randy?
Hi, how are you?
Can you hear me?
Can you hear me?
Can you hear me, Randy?
Oh, I can hear you now.
Okay, great. So I've just introduced you and given the mission statement of Impact Virginia, and I want to welcome you to the show and thank you for joining us tonight. And I have some questions for you, but I'd like you to go ahead and introduce yourself, what you do at Impact Virginia, and anything you want to talk about prior to getting to some questions.
Wonderful. Well, first, thank you for covering this very important topic and shedding a little light on it. I am the Director of Youth Advocacy with Impact and fairly active volunteer here in the I got involved in sex trafficking and interpersonal violence a few years ago when I had the life-altering opportunity to get to know a young woman who had been trafficked by a family member since a very young age. And it just changed the trajectory of my life course. I started the Master's in Social Work program here at VCU, and I will be finishing that this year. And I began just devouring information, anything I could get my hands on, to become more familiar with it and the prevalence of it in ways that I can help mitigate the problem.
Great. So
and, while poking my nose around, I came across Faye and her wonderful organization. Sent her an email, introduced myself, and I'm hooked.
All right. So in the work that you do and the work that Impact Virginia does, can you tell our listeners who the typical victims of human trafficking are, and can you describe them to our listeners?
I'm so sorry, I lost you.
So what I asked was, who are the typical victims of human trafficking, and can you describe them to our listeners?
Oh, okay, absolutely. So the victims are and we're talking about youth here, there's not really a typical victim. Unfortunately, there's no specific portion of the population. Every socioeconomic bracket, every race, ethnicity, geographic location, religion, physical ability, gender, that everybody can be victimized and is victimized. There are, however, some risk factors that are identified as putting our youth in a more vulnerable position to be trafficked. Females are about 75% of the identified population, and there are reasons for that I can go into later. Probably 93 to 95% of those who have been identified have said that they have a history of being physically and sexually assaulted. So we know that there is trauma in the past of almost all of these youth. Homelessness is a huge contributory factor. Previous involvement with Department of Social Services, so foster youth, juvenile delinquency, being in the juvenile justice system, and what we call runaways and throwaways. So throwaways are youth who have been kicked out of their homes by their family. So that whole category of familial dysfunction, which includes that domestic abuse, also substance abuse in the home. And, within that category, too, is the huge LGBTQ population, which is about 40% of the homeless youth population. And if you think about them being only about 7% of the total youth population, that is really a disparate, percentage. So.
And again, we're talking about Virginia, right? Or are we talking about in general?
Mostly Virginia, but it seems to be pretty constant across the U.S.
Okay. So I'm sure that's probably new information for our listeners who don't know a lot about human trafficking.
I'm sorry?
That's probably new information for our listeners.
Yeah, most people don't realize that this youth is not just what it's portrayed to be in the media. It's not, children who are kidnapped on the streets or, just youth who are strung out on drugs. This is also a problem in our public schools right here, where I live, out in the West End and in Midlothian and all around the Richmond metro area. And youth are actually being recruited to help recruit other youth in the high schools.
That's awful.
So it is a very hidden problem and a tremendously huge problem.
And and
one that once these youth have become enmeshed in it, they A, don't realize it for the most part, and B, don't know how to get out of it.
When you said that there are youth recruiting other youth, can you explain that a little bit and what kind of methods or what is it they do to recruit their peers?
So what I think you asked, and I'm catching about every third word, but what I think you asked is youth who recruit other youth and how that works.
Yes.
A lot of times youth will, there's sort of a hierarchy with a lot of the pimps and traffickers. And so to get kind of bumped up the list, a victim will be coerced into recruiting new victims to come and join along, and a lot of times they're not coerced by money in the high schools. They're coerced by material goods, electronics, fancy pocketbooks, clothing items, jewelry, things of that sort. And so these pimps will be older a lot of times than the high schoolers, but not that old, creepy guy that you think of in the movies. And these victims will be hooked up on dates and things like that. And, oh, he has just swept me off my feet, and he's buying me these beautiful things now. And next thing they know, they're in over their heads, and they don't know how to get out. They often they will find themselves at a party and, slipped one of those drugs, and then they see a picture of themselves that was taken while they were unconscious. And if they don't want that picture circulated all over the media, well, guess what you have to do instead? And they are afraid to tell their parents because they weren't allowed to go to that party. Or they start getting these gifts, and they like these gifts. And these pimps know they target the youth who are vulnerable, who come from homes where there's abuse, or these kids don't feel loved and safe and secure. And the kids think, oh, he loves me. He's not doing anything to hurt me. He thinks I'm special. And they don't understand because that prefrontal cortex isn't developed enough to help them see clearly what is going on. And, suddenly they're not just having sex with this 20-year-old guy. He suddenly needs them to do something. He needs a favor. And
so when we're talking about high schools where people are being recruited, you're saying that there's a pimp outside of the school who might be an older person, an older youth, but still a young person, who then finds someone within the school system who's working in conjunction with him to recruit girls.
Right, that's one of the situations that can happen.
Okay. Can you tell us some other ways?
Well, and it's not all, in person, too. We have to keep in mind that there are all kinds of things that count. There's erotic entertainment, and there's online porn industry, the selling of porn. There's also survival sex for these kids on the street who are having sex so that they can have a roof over their head or food to eat. So I don't want to just focus on one type, but getting back to your question too, other things that happen in the schools are kids who suddenly, start dating somebody, and there are apparently kids who are actually still in the high schools who are doing this and realize that this is a way to make money. One thing about these victims or survivors is that they are a commodity. This is something that can be sold again and again and again. It's not like guns or drugs that you sell one time and then you have to go out and get more. These traffickers can sell this and do sell the same girls or boys again and again, up to 20 times a day. So they're making money, hand over fist. And so kids in school have figured this out, and there are small pockets where there are youth in high school who are doing this to their peers.
Well, that's very
and
awful.
These are the groups who are doing it, more for the tangible goods than the money necessarily. They're luring them in with the merchandise.
So I guess at some point there's an element of trust, with these young adults in the schools. I'm assuming that they're friends with this person, or there's some element of trust that allows them to, be persuaded or talked into going this way.
Oh, yes. Traffickers are master manipulators. It's a very careful grooming process where they use their power and their control to coerce these victims and make them think that they're friends. You know, they're online friends or school peers, neighbors. And we have to remember, too, that still the majority of trafficking is done by family members, and even half of those family members are parents. But in the schools, they work hard and carefully to break the will of these kids and just really have them just, you know, they see, like I said, they see who's vulnerable. They see who they can get.
Sure. And so Impact Virginia, I read the mission statement earlier, which is to protect youth by advocating for prevention, education as a way to end the human trafficking of youth. So is Impact Virginia in the school system, or how can people connect?
So we're not physically in the school systems. We are working to get curriculum into the school systems that, you know, is, it's, you know, in some states, it's hard to even get sex ed into the school system.
Sure.
So to say the word sex with the word trafficking, or to say anything like that, it's difficult, and still it's important. So we want to be sure that we have good curriculum that has been empirically validated and have it approved. And there are counties in Virginia, mostly Northern Virginia, that already have this done, and they are seeing results. So we're working to just spread that around, and not just, you know, high schools, but middle schools, universities. We're working with VCU Med School to help their residents learn how to identify victims and help them too. So on the prevention side and the treatment side, it's very important for us.
Sure. And so in getting this information out to schools, how does Impact Virginia go about doing that? Do you have to approach a school board, or is it individual schools themselves, the principal that you speak with, or how do you reach out and get the program going?
What we have been doing mostly to date has been awareness through a lot of events that have been going on. We've had weekend symposiums and lecturing. We have links to a lot of great educational sites and links to software that's available, and just trying to, everywhere we go, you know, it's kind of a grassroots sort of situation at this point. You know, we reach out to individual organizations. We have not gone, you know, sat down with Henrico County and said, "Hey, we're coming in."
Right. I just didn't know if you had you know, a way that you went about trying to get the program outside of just, you know, events or seminars that people could attend or not attend, but if there was a way to, you know, actually bring those programs into the school with.
It's growing, and we're working on it.
Awesome.
But mostly trying to let people know that there are curricula available, and just the importance of doing it, because it's still so new, and trying to get people to realize at this point that it's here. I mean, it's not something that's just happening in other continents. It's right here in our yard.
Sure.
And
that's...
we're still at that point in Richmond, which is sad, because we're 15th in the nation.
Wow.
What?
For cities, not states.
Wow.
And, you know, we're still at that, hey, wake up, Richmond stage of the game. And
so why do you think people aren't more aware of the reality of this problem? And besides what you're doing and what your organization is doing, how can we bring awareness to this?
A lot of it is that the getting hold of reliable statistics is difficult because the nature of this crime. It's, you know, it's hard for people to come out and exit that life, and a lot of people are afraid to seek help. A lot of people don't realize that they themselves are being trafficked. Also, there's a stigma attached to it, and so anytime there's something that, shines a negative light on your city, well, you don't want to really say, hey, look at us, look what we've got going on.
Sure.
But people are starting to have to face it, and once you really shine a light on something, people have to see it.
Sure. I mean, that reminds me of the whole, rape culture thing in the universities and colleges around the country.
Exactly.
Where, that too did not want to be faced head on. And, do you want your kid going to a school where they're talking about that or, saying that it happens? No parent wants their kid going to a school, that's been branded with that. So it makes sense. How does the media and affect our view of human trafficking, and what exactly can they do to shed light on this and do a better job of, making us aware of the reality of the problem?
The media has done a number on it. Movies, for one thing, like Taken, which I'm sure everybody has seen, really has kind of glamorized pimping, glamorized prostitution. The media in general has created it's called a culture of tolerance. It's just normalized sexual acts as commerce in general, and the effect of all of this has kind of created the opposition of any chance of alleviating it. And, pimping looks cool. If you think about a lot of music, it makes pimping look cool, and even clothes, sex has turned into something that's just normal, and that combined with the hegemony that is still so prevalent in society really is slowing down any chance of turning this around. Ads, everywhere you look. If you look at an ad, you can't even tell what it's for 3 times out of 5.
Sure.
Because it looks like it's selling a scantily clad woman, not a car
right.
or a power tool. So it's hard for youth to understand what their own value is.
Sure. And this
am I really
is,
worth more than just this?
It's objectification. So yes, sex sells products, sells all kinds of things. And so, that, advertisers, corporations are contributing indirectly by using sex to sell their product.
Exactly.
So can you talk a little bit more about what you just said about the homogeny of I think probably some people don't really know what that word means or don't know a lot about that. So can you go over that a little bit?
Yeah, it is so deeply enmeshed in our bureaucracy. It controls our societal beliefs, actions, rules, everything. It's just the implicit dominance of men and the repression of women, in a kind of false binary of the genders. But, that kind of traditional iteration of men and women only, which I'm not going to get into that because that's a different conversation for another day. But it's where things started back years and years and years ago, and nothing has come about to change it. And so laws are all created around it. If you even just think about the Me Too movement and how people are now starting to say, hey, I want my fair shakes. And it's just a very slow moving machine that is still being cranked by men. But at this point, a lot of people will say that they can't even go to the police or go to the hospital to get treatment, because once they go there, they are not looked at as somebody who has been victimized by a man. They're looked at somebody who, oh, you're out selling your body.
Provoked it, right.
And, that's enmeshed and just ingrained in everybody's brains. And it's a problem that needs to be remedied, but I think it's going to be a while.
Sure. So when we're thinking about human trafficking and someone being trafficked, how can one recognize if someone is being trafficked, and how can that person help if they believe that is the case?
That is a really important question. And excuse me, knowledge is power. There are a lot of red flags. If you see somebody who's suddenly, like we said, suddenly dating an older guy, or being super secretive about a new boyfriend, and he's buying her lots of expensive presents, or somebody has this unusual tattoo out of nowhere. There are a lot of brandings and tattoos, like dollar signs or money, bags of money, words like king or daddy or owned, the pimp's names, things like that. They will have tattooed on their victims in places to show ownership. Speaking of the patriarchy. If somebody has a lot of things that she shouldn't be able to afford, like new clothes or a lot of cash, second cell phones or fake IDs, or if you see injuries that they can't explain, or they start acting really differently, really depressed or nervous, they start missing tons of school, or avoiding all their friends, or if you're a relative, if they start avoiding your family, hiding in their room, things like that. So, it depends on the context. If this is somebody at school or a family member, if this is a peer at school, go tell a school counselor or nurse. Those are what's called mandated reporters, and they will, I'm going to say should, know what to do, because they're mandated reporters, and I'm hoping have been trained appropriately. But don't go up to your friend on your own and say, hey, what's going on? Are you being trafficked? Because that could, A, put you in danger, B, probably not going to get your friend to be like, oh, yeah, hey, I am. Let's fix that.
Sure.
If it's, your child, I would suggest calling for help. And I would say to call Polaris or go on the Polaris website or text them, because they are trained to do this, and they will help you. They will walk you through the whole thing.
So those are signs that people can look for. I guess, mostly we...
I missed the end of that. I'm so sorry.
So those are signs that we can look for about someone being trafficked. And
Yes.
It seemed mostly like we were talking about kids in school, perhaps like, a friendship, a family friendship or something like that. What are outside of those areas? What are some other ways to recognize?
We talk a lot about places, the first responders who come into contact with these people the most often, and those are going to be, police officers and physicians. So we always suggest for them to look for things like if you see somebody who doesn't make eye contact with you and they're with somebody else who is that person who's obviously in control, like answers for them, doesn't let them have control of their own money. That person doesn't seem to really doesn't really know where they are, like what town this is, can't give you a good address or emergency contact, just doesn't really give you like a good medical history, or, you just kind of get a sense that they don't want to be forthcoming with personal information, or they can't talk freely in front of the person that they're with if they are with another individual. And again, unexplained injuries are a huge one.
Sure.
Because obviously the Johns aren't always delicate with these poor individuals. And to please always be on the lookout that these are not just young girls that this is happening to. This is all gender identities. So, clothes that are not always right for the season, they may, or not right for whatever situation you might be in, not professional clothes in a professional setting, that sort of thing.
Sure.
So and go with your gut.
Right. In thinking about what you've just said and these different signs, and you mentioned the first responders, are those people trained to understand human trafficking and what to do about that?
We're working on that.
Okay. Just wanted to ask because I know, some of the volunteer work I do with Safe Harbor, the first responders and the police officers that I might talk to if I go on a call, I believe have been trained but aren't necessarily sensitive always.
Right.
So.
And they are not always trained in how to appropriately address any victim of interpersonal violence. And I've been through the Safe Harbor training too. And so, we understand the importance of addressing these people very carefully and understanding that what they have been through is incredibly traumatic and not their fault. Oftentimes, the way police, starting with them, the way most police have been trained is a very antiquated system that they still use here in Virginia, to the best of my knowledge, that is not victim-friendly. And there are organizations that are working on that. And I know Chesterfield Police is on board, and I believe there are folks working with Henrico as well. I'm not sure what's happening with Hanover, but Chesterfield is, getting the big thumbs up. They are, I think, leading the pack on this.
Okay.
So,
what about?
And I live in Henrico, so I should be rooting for Henrico.
Sure. What about City of Richmond?
Uh-oh, are you there?
Yeah. What about City of Richmond?
City of Richmond, I don't hear a lot about, which is strange. So I should look. I'm sorry, I don't know, but I will look more into that.
Okay. And then the work that you do, that Impact Virginia does, how can people get involved if they want to volunteer? What kind?
We would love that, and there's a link on the website, which is impactvirginia.org, and there is a link that you can click on to volunteer, and Faye will get back to you right away. She reads every email.
Okay. And are there other ways, if you don't want to physically volunteer, that you can help, like financially or in other ways?
Yes, because we are a 501(c), we are completely dependent on people who can help in other ways. And also, just being cognizant of the problem is huge, and there's something called the Blue Heart Campaign, which is an awareness-raising campaign to fight human trafficking, and it's a global effort. And if anybody ever wants to look into the Blue Heart Campaign and just wear a blue heart, or, anytime you see a blue heart, say, hey, I know what that is, and tell whoever you're with. And just that spreading of awareness is probably the biggest thing that anybody can do, because the more people who know, the more people can be prevented from being lured into this.
Okay. And where could someone get a blue heart?
What?
Where could someone purchase a blue heart? Is a pin or?
There is, it's actually through United Nations, I believe. If you go on our website, there is a link to it.
Okay.
If you go on education on our website and click that tab, it will link you over to the Blue Heart campaign.
All right. Seems like a great way to raise awareness and possibly even funding. If you're paying for a pen or some type of
absolutely
something.
And if you're wearing a pin, or you have a little sticker on your MacBook or your car, and somebody's going to say, hey, what's that? Because it's not a cancer ribbon or something. It's different, and people will ask. And ultimately, in the big picture, this is a supply and demand thing. So if there are any economists out there, it's time to pay attention. This is supply and demand. And this isn't about, cutting off the supply. This is about getting it at the demand end of thing. And if we can, going back to that hegemony thing, if we can get to where there are no more Johns out there who think that they have a right to just demand this sex from other women and buy the bodies of young girls, then we won't have to worry about this endless supply anymore.
Sure.
So,
in that, I think you mentioned before about pornography and all of that, objectification, selling products. That all contributes to people believing that the Johns, that they're entitled to this.
Exactly.
So
100%.
Yes. So thanks for pointing that out. I really appreciate that you came on tonight, that you spoke about this really important subject. I did provide the number earlier, but I will do it again for the National Human Trafficking Hotline, which is 1-888-373-7888, as well as the Be Free text line, which is 233-733. I really appreciate your work, Randy, and Impact Virginia. I'm glad you could take the time to be on her tonight and share the information with our listeners. And thanks you for all the work that you're doing, the research to...
thank you so much. And the last thing, if I have one more second on that
Sure.
text line, if you type in help, they will text you back. And it's all confidential, and they text you back to make sure that it's a safe time. But if you type info to that number, the 233-733, if you type the word info to that, they will send you links, very helpful links to information about human trafficking and resources.
Okay.
So
That's info.
that's another.
Was that info or help?
If you type help, they will help you. If you type info, they will send you the resources.
Awesome.
Yeah. But thank you so much for helping with spreading this awareness. That's critical that you're doing that. I just appreciate it from the bottom of my heart.
Sure. I thank you for taking the time. As I mentioned earlier, WRWK is a independent radio station and staffed by all volunteers. Much like the work that you do at Impact Virginia, we are all volunteers, and we each have our own focus. I like to focus on human equal rights with a focus on her, and so human trafficking definitely is a topic that needs more exposure, more understanding, and more facts going out to the public. So thanks again, Randy, for
Oh, gosh, my
coming
pleasure.
on.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Randy.
Absolutely. My pleasure. Have a great night.
You too.
Bye-bye.
So thanks again for listening to another edition of Her, H-E-R, with the focus on her. Again, as I mentioned, this is an independent radio station. We do need help to keep the lights on, for our rent, for our equipment, things that the station needs to in order to keep operating. We do have membership levels that you can look at on the website if you want to be a monthly contributor. We can use any small amount or any amount that you're willing to donate. We do have bumper stickers that you can get for making a donation if you like.
T-shirts, we got some swag.
But more importantly, if you just want to, make a small donation, anything helps to keep us going and to keep this good information coming out.
Absolutely. And, we said at the top of the show, this is such a tough topic. This was a tough topic. I don't know if my mic is on. Am I hearing myself? Hello? There it is. Hey. Okay, well, it wasn't on, then it popped on. Not that you ever have a problem hearing me. But, this is a tough topic. But when I heard that statistic that Richmond is 15th in the country
Awful.
for human trafficking, wow, that blows my mind. So you know what? I am going to go look for blue heart stickers, pins, anything I can find to put on my car, wear on my lapel, give to our legislators, because when you wear those, you're actually in support of stopping human trafficking.
That's
so
right.
This was a great topic. Yet again, Leslie, you do it every time you have a show.
Man, thanks
you
so
do.
much.
You always have a great topic, and you're getting lots of comments on the live stream. Great show, great topic. People, chiming in, saying you had to focus on the arrest of these Johns. The fact that it's family members, that blows my mind too.
And the fact that, as Randy pointed out, that the laws were made by men. So that's who's being protected.
Right.
Instead of the survivors, the victims. So,
yes, always.
We've got to change that.
And we've got to stop shaming the victims.
That's right.
Because women, girls feel shame. They feel like it's their fault. They did something wrong. So just to remind people to look on the live stream. I've posted all those resources that Randy talked about, that you were talking about with her. PolarisProject.org. Of course, ImpactVirginia.org. And all those text numbers, phone numbers you were giving out, the hotlines, lots of great information. So thank you so much, Leslie.
Thank you, Sarah.
Always such a good show. So we'll be back in 2 weeks, which will be August 8th, I think.
I am not even exactly sure.
I think it's August 8th is the next date. So every 2 weeks, we're here with Her, Human Equal Rights. And you want to close us out?
Please join us. And join our other shows as well.
Yes.
We have some great shows in the Frequency of Hope with Stephanie, which is every Monday from 7 to 9. We have Boss Babes, right? Or
yes. Richmond Business Babes.
Richmond Business Babes.
Which will be back not tomorrow, but next Thursday, August 2nd at 11 a.m. with Lisa and myself. And I don't know who our guests are, but yes, she's still on vacay. But she said we're definitely on for next week. So, yes.
But thank you again for listening. Thanks for tuning in on Facebook. Again, WRWK is looking for help in all ways. Any money you have to donate or give, we can certainly use it. And we appreciate you taking the time to listen. Thanks for listening to tonight's show. And join us again for our next edition of Her in 2 weeks. Thanks so much.
And we'll take it out with a little...